My name's Tyler Jones. I'm from a small town in Canada, on the east coast of Canada. It's called Goose Bay. I'm in Labrador. I'm a crane operator by trade, and I also invest in real estate. I do some online personal training on the side. I started that up recently. And yeah, other than that, I'm an amateur bodybuilder as well, looking to turn pro.
How long have you been into bodybuilding?
My first competition season was last year. My first show was on October 30th, and then I done another show a week after, November 6th, and then I done a national show in December. So all those three shows were within a couple of months.
Gotcha. And have you always been a fan of the sport, or how'd you kind of get into it?
I've been a fan of the sport. When I started lifting, I guess I started lifting when I was around 15 years old or so, and from then I just kind of wanted to compete. There was a guy that was competing in my area at the time, and I was kind of like something that looked like it's something I wanted to get into. So yeah, I think since 15 years old, I never missed one Mr. Olympia. I just really wanted to become a bodybuilder and liked everything about the sport.
Was it something that you got into kind of at the modern day of when you started getting into it, or were you kind of a fan of like the previous generation? Like, I think a lot of people see like the golden era and that's how they kind of get into it. Was that you, or were you kind of like invested in like the modern current day of it?
Yeah, I mean, I used to watch a lot of wrestling as a kid, so that was kind of like I want to look like that guy in the ring, you know what I mean? But other than that, there's kind of progressed. I've seen obviously photos and videos of Arnold, and then when I watched my first Mr. Olympia, I think Jay Cutler won, so that was how I kind of got into it, and I liked. I didn't want to become that big, but I just was really interested in the sport itself.
Did you know kind of from the jump that you didn't want to be that big?
Yeah, it was like, well, at the time, I didn't think I could ever get that big anyway. So it was like, yeah, it's not a goal that I could achieve in my mind. That's what I thought anyway. But as you kind of learn more about the sport and what goes into it and what you have to do to get there, kind of opens your mind a little more. But once I really got into training, like Arnold obviously was a look I was going for. Frank Zane, Serge Nubret, those guys were like the physiques that I wanted to look like.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break here just for a second. Let me tell you about Smoking Gun Coffee. They're a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to produce a quality coffee at an affordable price. They only buy coffee from small coffee farmers around the world with a cup score of at least 85. Each batch is roasted to order for maximum freshness. They also donate a large portion of their proceeds to organizations that help local communities, veterans, first responders, or you can donate to the foundation of your choice at the checkout by going to www.smokingguncoffee.com. That's SMOKIN Gun Coffee. Does it feel like almost, since the time you got interested in it, being 15 till today, that it's kind of grown into more of like a bigger accepted community?
I definitely feel like it's more of an accepted community now, and I really like the of like where the sport it's going, because when I first started watching it, the main division was bodybuilding, obviously, and now you got men's physique and classic physique, which only happened within the last 6 years, which is I think a huge advancement for the sport. So I definitely think, and those physiques are like people look at that and they want to look like that, and I think it's a lot more attainable, and people obviously think they can attain it themselves and they go for it. So I like where the sport is going for sure. It's more of as an aesthetic look as well, because people look at that and like they actually want to look like that, rather than I don't know, back when when it was Jay Cutler winning and Phil Heath winning, like a lot of people look at that and be like, no, that's too much.
Yeah.
But now you got guys like Chris Bumstead, Rough Diesel, and Logan Franklin. I mean, all those guys, incredible physiques, and a lot of people look at those guys and want to look like that.
So when you first started bodybuilding, was there any second thoughts of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it was going to take all this. Am I really up for this?
Yeah, well, that was a big thing for me because I mean, when I first started training, I don't know, like I had a lot, like I started and I was a pretty chubby kid growing up. And then I got in hockey when I was around 12 years old or so. So that, and then I started losing some weight. And obviously, like boosted my confidence. I wanted to keep it going. So that's when I hit the gym. And from there, it only progressed. And yeah, but I still had a lot of self doubt, and I always thought like I wasn't big enough to compete, or I wouldn't be able to get lean enough to compete. And finally, I hired a coach, and we started working on it. And that was the biggest thing for me was a coach, and he said like you got the size to compete, like you'll do well, don't worry about it, and trust the process. And then I actually never I just told you that I competed for the first time last year, but I actually tried to compete in 2018 and I dieted for 22 weeks. And at 4 weeks out, the show got canceled due to COVID. So
Man.
I was 2 years trying to do a show after that, and that was the first one I done. But yeah, at the start, I definitely think. Well, I wanted to compete, but I just didn't think I had what it took. But then, as years progressed, and I hired a coach, now it's all I wanted to do, really.
In between the time of like wanting to compete and trying to compete in that 2018 time frame, what, explain a little bit of kind of what went through your mind about like, was there any, am I going to get back up there? Am I going to lose my progress? Like anything of that going through your head?
When I was 4 weeks out, it was. I think it was good that I dieted down that much before it actually got canceled because at 4 weeks out, I mean, if you're not looking like you're ready, then you're probably not going to be ready to step on stage. So at 4 weeks out, I knew I had what it took to step on stage, and I was very impressed and knew I could get on stage and do well. When that happened, I mean, I knew I could get up there and like removed all doubt that I had that I could do well in the sport.
Having that first real prep before, and you didn't get to compete, did that like almost change the way, you kind of mentioned like it gave you that confidence, but it kind of like boost anything or change the way you trained a little bit, not necessarily in the way you train, but like the kind of the intensity or like, man, I can see what I am, like I have the potential to be now, give me some more time and just imagine what I can come back and be next time around.
Yeah, definitely. Like it was still hard. Like it was still hard on the head. I mean, I was 4 weeks out and I couldn't actually step on stage. I never got to do what I intended to do. I never got to get to my goal. But once I seen my physique at 4 weeks out, like, and I knew that I could place well, I was like, well, the next time I prep and I get ready for stage, like I'm gonna do some damage and do whatever it takes to get on stage and be better, even better the next time.
And what do you think changed? From that first prep, I feel like you learn a lot about yourself and kind of what, how you handle what you're going through. What do you think you took from that you applied to the next time, the time that you actually got to go all the way through with it and get on stage? Like, what do you think you learned from that first initial one?
Yeah, I definitely learned a lot. You know what I mean? I think the first prep, I really stressed a lot about things that I didn't need to stress about. Like I wanted to make sure everything was perfect. Training had to be perfect. I had to keep progressing. The food intake had to be perfect. Like, and then I was like just so stressed out about making sure everything was perfect. I was going to have a perfect prep, but obviously nobody has a perfect prep. It just doesn't happen. So I think the following prep really helped with that because like I wasn't as stressed out and it was a smoother process. I wouldn't say it was easy, but I think as you prep more often, the preps do get easier. And my coach explained that the first time I prepped, and yeah, he was definitely right.
Did you feel like the second time and third time you went through those things, it was like your body started to almost respond to it like more naturally?
It's hard to say. Like my next prep was very long as well because I started prepping for that October show in February. Initially, I was supposed to compete in July. We dieted down, and the diet was going really well, but then I hit a plateau for almost 4 to 6 weeks, and then the show actually got pushed back again, and we were kind of scared that it was going to get canceled. So we said, we'll just compete in October. We'll take the July show out of it. And because I wasn't pushing so hard then, I found that my body started responding really well. And we pretty much done a recomposition diet for up until about August, and then really started pushing again for the prep. And yeah, my body responded really well to that.
Do you feel like that's almost part of every prep is having some kind of like, oh shoot moment, or like, is it going to work out, or some kind of hurdle you have to overcome? Do you feel like that's just a part of like the process almost every time?
I definitely do. I mean, there's so many things that come up during prep and like you're not equipped for. So I mean, you just gotta roll with the punches and do whatever it takes to get on stage. If you have the mindset that you're gonna get up there no matter what, then anything that comes, you can get through it and do what it takes to get up there.
Yeah, and talking about being on stage, like how was that experience for you? Tell us a little bit about that the first time. I mean, I'm sure that was, such a foreign kind of, a foreign experience to anybody,
Yeah.
and then getting up there and, it's such a physical event of like this is what, I'm showing you everything. This is it. This is what I've been doing. Tell us a little bit about how that you handled that kind of like mentally and emotionally.
Honestly, I'm a bit of a shy guy, so I didn't know how I was going to respond to getting up on stage in front of a lot of people. Because I mean, the first show that I done was the Summer Shredding Classic in Houston, and I don't know if you are familiar with that or the audience, but that was a big show. There was over 400 competitors at that show, and there was quite a few in the audience as well. So wasn't sure how I was gonna be on stage or how was it gonna go. So I don't know, man. Like we were backstage and all the competitors were super nice. We all got along well. We were talking backstage, just pumping up. It was just awesome experience. And then when my name got called to go out on stage, I just walked out there and it was the same thing as I was posing in the dressing room, like the whole prep. Cause I mean, I spent about an hour each day, pretty much the last 4 weeks posing. And it just became second nature, man. I walked on stage, done my posing routine, done the mandatories, and yeah, it went well. A lot better than I expected, to be honest.
Was there any emotion that you didn't really expect to happen kind of after that first show, or even after like any show? Like what kind of emotions do you go through?
The first show was very emotional for me because Summer Shredding is ran by Christian Guzman, and I started watching Christian Guzman probably about 8 to 10 years ago when he first started his YouTube channel. So that being at that show for my first show was a pretty cool experience regardless. And then I ended up winning the overall in bodybuilding at that show. So I mean, like there was quite a few emotions going through when I'd done the show and got the win.
Was it kind of a weird thing for you at first to like do these poses and like actually go through a routine and have to practice and like, all that whole aspect of it? Because I feel like, most people think bodybuilding, you work out, you eat, and then you sleep and you repeat, but there's so much more to it. And posing, I think, is such a big aspect.
Posing is a huge aspect, and a lot of people don't realize that shows are won from sometimes shows can be won just from posing alone. If you have two people that are very similar and the judges are looking to see which one has a better physique, and one guy is really good at posing and the other guy is subpar, like the guy who can pose is definitely winning all day. It's crazy how much more you can show of your physique when you know how to pose better, and just being comfortable up there on stage and knowing your poses. The judges really reward you for that.
And did you ever kind of get frustrated or have any, struggle with the posing and learning the routine and kind of getting down? I guess, because you don't really get to see, in the mirror you can, but when you're up there on stage, it's just kind of like you got to be so muscle memory with it. You got to just really know what others are seeing when you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to just practicing your posing and making sure you have a routine. Like if you pick your routine, pick your poses, practice it, and you're doing that for an hour a day, and maybe you start 4 to 6 weeks out, like by the time show day comes, it should be just natural to go on stage, do your routine, and not forget anything, and just it'll be a smooth process.
How has your training changed over the years? Obviously, starting at 15, you're gonna have a lot of changes over time, but like, what do you feel like has been the biggest change or some of the bigger changes to your training and the workout side, the nutrition side, the recovery side of things?
When I first started training, like the fundamentals haven't really changed, we'll say, because I mean, still hitting the same body parts, that doesn't change. It's still hitting like the compound lifts, except for deadlifts. I don't deadlift anymore. I think there's definitely better exercises for the back for hypertrophy for bodybuilding purposes, but I did deadlift when I first started training. Obviously, all the compound lifts, yeah, like so fundamentals didn't really change, but I remember when I first started, I was so obsessed with getting stronger. Like me and the boys in the gym, we go in and try to max out our lifts at least once every couple of weeks or once a month, sometimes once a week. Like it was just the recovery from trying to max out all the time obviously impedes your progress. And then you're wondering why you're not getting stronger. But that's just it comes with time. And obviously, if I had hired a coach back then, like that's something they would go over. So I do recommend to people, if you're first starting training, you actually want to do bodybuilding, definitely hire a coach and pick what show you want to do. But yeah, the training over time has definitely changed a little bit for sure.
This podcast is sponsored by Smoking Gun Coffee, a veteran-owned coffee company that strives to give back to those in need. Don't forget to use code TWR10 for a 10% discount at checkout.
Like when I first started, my routines, I just go in the gym and get it done. Like go through the motions, make sure I get 3 sets, 12 reps of this. But now it's more so like I'm going in the gym for a purpose. If it's 3 sets, 12 reps, I want to make sure every single rep counts. And it's not just going through the motions just to get 12 reps done so I can leave. You know what I mean?
And how do you feel like you keep that drive going?
Where I'm at in my bodybuilding career right now, I think like the biggest drive for me is obviously to do better at my next show. But before I'd done a show, like my goal was just to make progress each and every week to make sure that when I step on stage, like I belong up there. That was my goal. I just wanted to look like I belonged up there, and I had a good physique, and that would push me to work hard in the gym.
And it's funny you mentioned that to belong up there, because I've heard several people recently talk about how they like would have dreams before, before going on stage, and it would be like their physique is just completely different, or they forget their posing routine. Like, have you ever had any, of those things happen?
I haven't had those happen myself, but I definitely heard stories in the past, like you just mentioned. Like a big thing for me was, like I said, wanting to look like I belonged up there. Like I honestly didn't know what to expect on my first show, but I just knew that I didn't want to go up there and place last, or like get up there and not look how I wanted to look.
Bodybuilding is such a subjective thing. It's based on what the judges want and what they want kind of that day a lot of times too. Or do you struggle at all with accepting that fact that, hey, I can bring what I can bring, and it's up to me to do that, and I can't really handle what they say or what other competitors are doing? Has that ever, been a little bit of an issue for you?
I think now, after getting the first couple of shows out of the way, I think I have a more understanding of that, because at the first show that I done, I actually competed in 2 different divisions. I done the bodybuilding and classic physique. And classic physique is where I'm headed right now. Like that's the division I want to stay in and succeed at. But I actually came second in the classic physique and then won the bodybuilding. And the guy that I came second to in classic physique ended up taking the overall, but he was also the same guy that I was competing with in the bodybuilding later that night. So it's just, and it was all up to the judges' decision, because they said that I was more conditioned and he had the better insertions and better look, we'll say. So, I mean, and that's all up to the judges, because other judges would say different, and some people have said different themselves. So it's just depends on who the judges are and what they're looking for. And some shows or some judges you'll go to, and they'll pick the most conditioned guy, and sometimes you might compete a week later and you'll win based on like how the size you had and the look you had. And there might be a guy that was a little more conditioned, but they just chose your physique because they liked it a little more. So it's definitely can be up in the air sometimes, which at the end of the day, you try not to look into it too much and just do your best for the next time, because realistically, like, just because you lost that show or lost to that guy doesn't mean that you won't succeed in bodybuilding. For your next show could be a completely different outcome, and because you didn't keep progressing or keep trying to get to your goal, then you might have done a lot better, but you just wouldn't know because you quit.
Do you ever kind of shut off social media, or do you ever kind of like do anything to kind of keep the noise just, really in your head? Like it's just you, or it's just your coach, it's just the people in your corner.
Yeah, I think like you really just got to focus on yourself and what you can control. And I think it's definitely detrimental to be looking on social media all the time and seeing your competitors, seeing what they're looking like, seeing their posing. I mean, you can get in your head about that stuff because, I mean, when you're down to the wire 3 to 4 weeks out, like, everyone is looking pretty good and they should be looking pretty good. And you're just looking at, say, your phone, and this guy is like, oh my God, he's a little more shredded than me. He looks bigger. But at the same time, it's Instagram and it's photos. You can alter a photo, you can take it in better lighting, you can take it with a pump. So, I mean, like, it's not a realistic version of the guy you're up against, and you're only going to know how well you're going to place or how well you're going to look once you actually get on stage next to him.
When it comes to getting on stage next to that person, what kind of jitters?
The beauty about it is that on that day, you just know that every single hour you put in the gym, every meal you had, everything you've done comes down to that days, and all the work is done. It's over. So, I mean, like, the last thing you have to do is all you have to do is go out on stage and pose and do your best there. So, I mean, like, I myself on that day, I was running on adrenaline, even though I didn't have much energy that whole week leading up to it. But yeah, on that day, I mean, that all went out the window. I definitely had a lot of energy. I was excited to get up on stage, and I was looking forward to it. But I will say that, well, even on the first two shows, I was in the pump up room looking around at everybody else, and I was like, oh shit, like, I don't belong here. And then I ended up winning overall. So, I mean, it comes down to just being in your head a little too much. You know what I mean?
What happens? What do you do? And when it's all over, when the show's over, all that time and effort, I'm sure you have a plan for what's next, but like, is there any of that, like, oh man, I put all this work in, now to do the next thing, I got to redo it all again. I got to go through it all again. Does that ever almost like hit you a little bit when the show's over?
Yeah, I mean, on show day, it's just such an awesome experience, and, like, that everything, like, it's really rewarding once the show is over and done, and you can finally, like, you're obviously a lot less stressed. You can celebrate, enjoy your time, and just know that you have, depending on when you're going to do your next show or whatever, you have like a significant amount of time that you can feel normal again, start eating normal again. So yeah, it's just the process of going through it, knowing that you have another amount of time to get back to normal, and then you can get ready to compete again, and it's just one big cycle.
And so, with your experience in bodybuilding and your success in the sport, what do you think is the most overlooked aspect? Is it the recovery side, the sleep? Is it I'm sure everybody's really good at training and really good at diet, at least to a certain degree, but like, what do you think is that smaller thing that people just sometimes don't dial in and that can sometimes cost them?
Yeah, well, you mentioned sleep. I do think sleep is super important when you're prepping, especially. You need to sleep to grow, you need sleep to recover, and you need sleep to perform well. So, I mean, I found melatonin really helped me. So I used to take around 3 milligrams of melatonin a night and try to get 8 hours. But when you're super lean on the last few weeks, it's hard to get sleep, and it starts to get pretty stressful. But I do think that uh, that's something you can control, and you should really do whatever you can to make sure that you have ample sleep each night. And other than that, I would say conditioning. Like, I feel like, yes, everyone's just gonna do what their coach tells them, or eat what they need to get lean or whatever. But I do see that a lot of people on stage could be more conditioned, and that's something you can 100% control. So, and it can win you a show, and it usually does. So, I mean, there's not much that you can do when you start prep to gain size. You know what I mean? Or you can't change your genetics either. So, I mean, those are things that you can't control, but you can control your sleep and you can control your conditioning. And the conditioning definitely will win shows. If you're the most conditioned guy up there, there's a lot of times that the judges will favor you and you can bring home a win.
So you mentioned the kind of struggling with the sleep, during prep. What other, if any, kind of like adverse things did you experience or do you still experience during prep, especially kind of when it gets down to the last couple of weeks? Is there anything?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, being a chubby kid growing up, like I always had, like obviously I love food. So, um, and I take the approach of if it fits your macros, and that's not to say like go out and eat whatever you want just to hit your macros. Like I definitely eat 90% good and whole foods, and I will throw in the occasional treat. But I feel like once you get to the nitty gritty of prep, you just don't have the calories to be able to eat the things that you normally would enjoy. So yeah, it gets pretty tough, especially for me, because I like when I get really lean, I have to get down to like a really low caloric intake. And at the end of my last prep, I was down to around 1,600 calories. So for someone that was 190 pounds at the time, I wasn't many calories, and I couldn't fit in the stuff that I usually do to make prep more enjoyable. So yeah, it got really tough toward the end
Yeah.
in that aspect.
Yeah. And I feel like that's, what separates a lot of times the winners and the rest of them. What do you think is that number one trait that separates, the competition?
Yeah, I would have to say it's discipline. Like you got to make sure that you get your meals every day, you get your training in every day, you get your cardio in. If you have a coach, make sure that you listen to what he's saying and trust the process. And that all just comes down to discipline and making sure you hit each and every one of those aspects of bodybuilding.
And do you feel like that's kind of been something that you've always been strong at, or has bodybuilding really kind of developed that for you?
It's definitely developed it for me. And even from the first prep that got canceled to the next one, it's getting better for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of people mistake it for kind of something that you're either born with or not.
Yeah. And in saying that, I mean, I really feel like some people look at it as black and white, and it's either they're on their diet 100% or they're off their diet. And that's a huge thing. Is like if you mess up on your diet one day, it's not the end of the world. Like you can get back on track. You can start the next day and go from there. Like it's not going to make or break anything. And I feel like some people that when they go off track, it's like, oh, I messed up this day, and then they get into a bit of a snowball effect and just keep messing up, and then they're at a place that it's really hard to recover from. When if they had just took that loss and moved on and not thought about it, they would have been fine.
What kind of advice would you have for an up and coming, young guy, young person who wants to get into bodybuilding? What advice would you have for him?
My advice would be if you're young and you're starting out and you really want to get into bodybuilding and do the sport, just like I'd recommend to get a coach and just pick a show and do it. If you've been training for a couple of years and you think you have what it takes, then and you know what's involved in bodybuilding and that's the route you want to take, then just pick a show and do it. And I think that was my biggest regret when I was younger, just not doing a show when I could have, just because of self-doubt and whatever else. But yeah, if I had picked a coach back then and done the show, I would have been obviously progressed a lot more from where I am now, but that's all in the past. So yeah, my advice would be to If there's something you want to do, pick a show and get a coach and go for it. Like, you're only going to get better from that first time you do it. That first show, like, you're only going to go up from there. So to be able to do that when you're young and then progress from there, I mean, you're going to be so much further ahead of the competition years down the road. If bodybuilding is something you want to do, then start early, and I promise you'll do well.
Definitely. So if you want to, before we head out, if you want to share your social media or anything where people can follow you or get in touch with you.
Yeah, so I use Instagram and TikTok, and I'm Tyler Jones Physique on both.